Okay, so today I'm sitting down with Mike Jones. He's an early stage founder and investor. Mike's been in a bit. We've actually known each other for about 20 years, Mike. I don't know if you realize that.
It's been a long time. I know.
So I met Mike a long time ago when he was running a company called Userplane, and Userplane powered the instant messaging on my dating site, Rate or Date, which was a knockoff of Hot or Not. Completely. I sold that, and Mike grew his business for many more years. And Mike sold his company for, I think it was to AOL. Is that correct?
That's right. They bought Userplane from us to be part of their kind of communications platform.
Yeah. And that was in 06?
Sounds right. Feels like a long time ago. You might know the date better than I was. I'd have to look it up on Wikipedia or something.
I think that was an unreported amount, but I think the rumors out there, it was a lot. Let's put it that way. And I don't think you raised outside capital.
It was a great deal.
Right? No outside
capital.
No,
it was all founder bootstrapped. I mean, at that point, like the venture market was pretty light. So we were happy to kind of work our way through it.
That's amazing. Yeah, in the early 2000s after the crash, nobody was raising money. So you had a bootstrap. Yeah. And then I think, if I'm reading my notes correctly, in 2008, you started Savo Media, which I think you sold for $75 million, right?
Right. That was with kind of partnership on a private equity firm. I took over a kind of a big publishing media company that had some special relationships with Yahoo and AOL. And then we sold that business as well.
And then surprisingly, like 2 years later, Mike becomes the CEO of MySpace as a turnaround project, right?
That's right. So the fellow that had led the acquisition and was the CEO of AOL at the time when they bought my first company, Userplane, he was hired to be the kind of digital strategist with News Corp. And they realized they had kind of an operational problem growing in News Corp and obviously a competitive problem with Facebook. And so they brought in me with a handful of other executives to try to see if we could turn it around.
And I guess the idea was see if you could turn it around in terms of traffic, and if not, find a soft landing and get rid of it. Was the idea?
Essentially, I mean, we probably put 2 years into a turnaround effort, kind of came to the conclusion there was no way to really fight Facebook, and that battle had already been lost before we even really started. And then basically kind of broke up the company internationally and sold it off through a few international transactions.
And then after that, you started Science. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. Partnered up with 3 other kind of core co-founders. So 4 of us came together and started, what became as a studio, then a studio and a venture fund, and then a studio, a venture fund, and a late stage practice.
Right. You also have acquired businesses, right, over the years? You bought some assets?
Yeah. So the early days of Science, we were actually running kind of a consolidated strategy, and we bought a few companies, then we sold a few companies, but then we kind of moved really into supporting other people's concepts. So the majority of the venture side of the world is really working with early stage founders on their dreams and visions and seeing what we can do to kind of, bring them out to market and get them to scale.
And back in like 2011, I had a podcast many years ago, 10 years ago, and I had you on the podcast back then. I think it's when you first started, and Peter like reached out to me like about a couple weeks later and was like, dude, we got an investment. Are you interested? And that was DogVacay, which now is essentially going public as Rover.com.
Yeah.
That's
great. Exactly
so
right.
Thank you for that.
I think we'll all be happy with that. We're excited to see
unfortunately,
that happen.
I have weak hands. I sold to Andreessen, I think, along the way on the Series C, and then I sold the rest of it on the Rover acquisition. So, but whatever. I mean, angels don't have a lot of protection with no pro rata rights and stuff, so it made sense actually. I think I probably did okay. I don't know what I probably would have done better if I held, but you got to de-risk along the way. Anyway, thank you for that. But you guys also did Dollar Shave Club. You were an investor in Dollar Shave Club.
That's right. We were kind of the first investor in Dollar Shave Club, spent a lot of time with that team on their journey to scale. It was kind of our biggest, most well-known acquisition to date. So it was exciting for us. That was a big fun one return for us.
And are you still running, you guys did Science Blockchain. Are you still doing that?
We do. So Science Blockchain was one of the first kind of Reg D offered, security-based tokens that actually ties back to equity, et cetera. And so it's structured as a fund. It is a regulated entity, and we do still run that. And it does have a series of investments that we're pretty excited about. And with the most recent kind of swell and excitement around Bitcoin, there's a lot of other new stuff that's happening inside there that gets me excited.
So we will definitely get into Bitcoin, blockchain towards the end of the interview. But the reason why I bring people on the show is I try to bring people on that I believe are docents, and a docent is a guide in a museum or a zoo or something like that. So I loosely define what I consider to be influential people that have inspired other people. I think you're one of those types of people. I believe you're a docent. And so what I really like to learn from the docents, though, are who were their docents when they were growing up. Who are the people they looked up to or inspired them? These could be your parents, your teachers. It could be other professionals, athletes, who knows? So let's dive in, Mike. So where did you grow up?
So I was born in Philadelphia, but I really spent most of my childhood in Oregon. My dad was a financial planner, so he spent a lot of time, structuring, helping me understand the structure of capital, money, and investments. My mom was kind of a self-made realtor who ended up building up her own real estate practice, owned her own firm, eventually sold her firm, became one of the first women in the Rotary Club, really a well-recognized, founder as a woman in the 80s, which was really exciting. So both of my parents were essentially entrepreneurs, essentially worked for themselves. And I kind of grew up in that, kind of with that context of, well, if you're going to do something great, you should do it yourself. Why wouldn't you build it for yourself? And so at an early stage, I was always, starting little businesses and finding little ways to make money and liking that kind of control I would have over my own destiny.
Were you a gamer as a kid? Did you play games?
Yeah, played a ton of games, spent a lot of time on a computer. Growing up in Oregon, it rains a lot. So you're kind of, quarantined inside. I think my mom said when she got my first computer, she just didn't see me for years. That was the end of my relationship with the family. I never
Screw these humans.
Collaborative. I'm here all the time. You know? And so so I grew up on computers.
How did you decide, or how did you get into programming? Because I'm always fascinated with the guys that really got into tinkering with electronics or something. Like Philip Kaplan was in making things and stuff when I did interview with him years ago. Did you do any of that kind of stuff? And how did you do that?
Yeah.
Did anybody tell you? How did you learn how to program when you're a little kid in the 80s?
So I was never, I did learn to program, and I could, at the early stages of the web, I was maybe somewhat of a proficient programmer. I never had a formal programming education. Sure. It was all very much self-taught out of necessity. And I think also the tools back then were really easy, especially in HTML. So I would imagine now, if I was trying to jump into programming, it'd almost be starting over. So I would never claim to, at this point, to even be a programmer. But I knew how to bring people together, which helped me form teams and groups and take on projects. I was super curious about things. I became very focused on things. I can spend a lot of time trying to unwind a project or figure out the way things worked, which computers are kind of perfect for that. And because I was also growing up, probably similar to you in that time where it was first it was your first PC, and then you're assembling your first PC and building it, and then it's DOS, and then it's Windows, and oh my God, here's a modem, and there's AOL. You kind of grow up through all the steps. So it's not you're going from 0 to 100, right? At that point, computing was computing was growing at the same level that I was growing, and so that provided a nice platform to be bite-sized in the way that kind of
I would imagine the kids today have to feel overwhelmed. There's just so much now compared to when we were younger. It was just much simpler, easier, right?
I imagine it's kind of if you think of your dad or my dad with a car or something, right? When they were growing up, they probably really knew the way cars work, But now, if you brought me to a car and said, open up the hood and do something, I wouldn't even literally know where to start, right? Because back then, I don't know, it's Grease Lightning days. They're all hanging out at mechanic shops, drinking Pepsis and building old VWs or something. That's obviously not the way computing is today, right? So I think when we grew up in computing, it all made sense to us. Now, when you're trying to relate these concepts to people that didn't grow up with it, it feels super foreign, right?
I would imagine, yeah. Do you actually remember the first experience you had with the internet? Can you remember that?
I can. I can remember that. So my junior high in the library had a service that connected to a kind of worldwide news service. It wasn't the World Wide Web, and this was predating really AOL. It was a library connected internet archive database of news. And I remember sitting there and immediately searching about the Beastie Boys, because I was I got to see what the Beastie Boys are up to, and finding all these old articles about Mike D and researching my favorite musicians, but then also being my God, I want this at home. This is incredible, unbelievable, unlimited knowledge attached to this little computer with And so I remember feeling that way when I first sat down there and did it. And then subsequently, I remember spending a lot of time at AOL, because for many of us, AOL was really that first gateway. I did, originally touch bulletin board systems. I had other fun, friends at school that were kind of playing with that stuff. But I do remember those moments.
You remember going on the AOL chat rooms, I guess, and just spending endless hours at night, right? Talking to people all over the world.
Yeah, exactly. Getting lost, probably a much safer time for, children and adults.
Well, unless you went into the room called PIX. I don't know if you remember that, PICS. If you went into the AOL chat room PIX, all of a sudden your email gets flooded with pictures of naked girls. I remember that. My friends told me, I was like, whoa.
What is this?
This is amazing. Yeah, don't tell mom. Yeah, that was fun.
I also remember when I got my first webcam, and I still have an image that I shot of my best friend and I from some little Logitech initial webcam, and being oh my God, I can put a picture inside of a computer. This is a crazy idea,
I remember the video service was Microsoft back then. I can't remember the name of it, but Microsoft powered that, and it was you were you're choppy and moving.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But it seemed that at some point we'd be doing this. Like, it seemed so clear and obvious to me back then. About you.
Yeah. No, I think it felt like there was an infinite world happening inside there. And I remember people talking about the internet as a trend and all this stuff. And that just felt so ridiculous because suddenly like it took all of our time and effort. And now it's like, I mean, what aren't you doing throughout the day that isn't connected to the internet?
Oh my God, everything. My entire house is actually connected to the internet. We have like a smart house. So like everything is connected now, Everything. And everything will be too, like Amazon and Alexa and stuff. It's just like, it's going to get easier and easier. Light bulbs now, you can put the light programmable. I mean, it's pretty cool what they can do. And it's all Wi-Fi. Our house is wired because we built the house, but it doesn't need to be. So it's amazing what you're going to be able to do with the internet. It's crazy. It's kind of scary in some ways too, actually.
Yeah, constantly connected.
Yeah, like they're always listening. I think Alexa's in the background. If I say it too loud, she'll talk to me. It's crazy. So when did how did you move into becoming an entrepreneur? Like, so you go to college. Where did you go to college? And then when did you decide? Did you have a job initially, and then you transitioned into becoming an entrepreneur? Like, explain that transition. And why? Sure.
Well, there were certainly like entrepreneurial moments in high school around fundraisers and book sales and all that stuff. And I was really comfortable selling, which like, just like you would know, is like, it's a forever skill. Like if you're comfortable selling, you can kind of work anywhere and it becomes a cornerstone. So I was really comfortable as a young kid selling because my dad's selling financial planning services. My mom's selling houses. I'm working at open houses on the weekends I'm learning sales, right? I go to college. I get bored. I take up a job at the college computing center, and I went to University of Oregon. It was kind of like my parents were like, "Congratulations, you got into Pepperdine and University of Oregon. University of Oregon's 1/10 the price. You'll be going to U of O."
Oh man!
Right? It was really really simple, which was great. And I was super
Pepperdine's sick though.
Pepperdine's sick. But I ended up meeting my wife there, like first week of University of Oregon, and we've been together forever. So it's an incredible experience at University of Oregon. But I ended up working at the computing center. Met a bunch of other people like me, taking apart computers, learning all this stuff. And then, in fact, one of my core CTOs, who became one of my best friends, and then a business partner that's been almost in all my businesses, I met at the University of Oregon Computing Center. And he was getting a CS degree, and I was taking business courses. And suddenly, that pairing just worked beautifully. So I'm working at the University of Oregon Computing Center. I'm meeting a bunch of people. I eventually go off to Washington, D.C. for a quarter with my wife, my girlfriend at the time, work as an intern. Essentially come back and I decide we're going to start this magazine. So my wife and I and a handful of friends start this magazine, and lo and behold, this little magazine we start in the Eugene, Oregon campus of the University of Oregon becomes like a nationally distributed pop culture kind of zine, right? Which is like a fun, cool thing you would do in essence in the late 90s. We're meeting all these artists and bands and having all this fun and traveling. And suddenly I had this magazine. And then the web started coming up, right? And suddenly I'm like, well, we've got to bring the magazine onto the web. No one knew how to do it. My friends and I basically figured it out. And then suddenly companies were like, hey, you can put stuff on the web. We need stuff on the web. Come work with me. And so I started an agency basically in the middle of college that basically provided web development services and advertising services. And that was my sophomore, junior, senior year. And then subsequently after college, that company continued for 5 or 6 years. And that was actually the first company I sold. And so it was a company I started in the middle of college.
And that was a web development company basically?
Yeah, it was a web development company. We worked as like the software development.
When did you graduate college? What year?
I graduated in 97.
97, okay.
We probably sold that company in 2000.
Okay, wow. And what were you going to say? I cut you off, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I mean, we basically provided back-end services for everyone from like Red Bull to advertising agencies. So like we were, working with all these really cool brands, being this young team of creatives and developers that were building neat things. And it kind of taught me, a business, right? Like I was early 20s, I ended up with a big staff, operation in New York, LA, Oregon, like a bunch of offices. Like we did the whole thing. Yeah. And I look back now and think like, God, I must have been like the worst boss ever. Just like
21-year-old kid,
21, 22-year-old kid telling these adults what to do, these old school programmers. And this is the time when like you got to set up your own servers and stuff and like working with level 3 and you have all your, it's like there was a bunch of infrastructure. And, I mean, looking back, it was just, the whole thing was crazy. And I'm kind of like, why did those people work for me? Like that was like such a weird time. But
why did they just do it themselves? Right?
It just felt strange. Yeah, the whole thing felt strange.
But there's something to that, right? That you had that desire to want to lead teams, and so some people just don't have that for whatever reason. It's not a bad thing, but you just had that desire to want to do that. Probably watching your parents.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like you've probably seen, like I know entrepreneurs that are absolutely self-made and totally horrible at leading
Yeah,
teams.
totally.
And I know people that are awful at creative and technology, epic at leading teams, and they've also become successful. So it's not even like one or the other, but I mean, I love bringing people together on a mission, right? Like that was just something I always loved.
I remember Reid Hoffman, he invested in one of my companies a long time ago, and he sat down, he says, is it important for you to be this, before he made the decision, he's like, is it important for you to be the CEO? And I was like, this is a gotcha question. No, it's not. And I was like, and then I go, well, why do you ask? He goes, it's a good question. He's like, for me, he's like, I'm actually stepping down. At that time, he was stepping. It was around 2006, and I think he appointed Jeff as the CEO. And he's like, I just didn't find that it was something I was good at or wanted to do. I don't know if he said good, but he just didn't want to do it. About 50 employees. He's like, it just becomes political. He just wasn't interested. And I was like, looking at him at the time, and I was like, I don't. And then I got to a point where my company had a lot years later, and I was like, he's so right. Like, I totally don't like. Some people are meant for it, but like, I just don't like managing more than say 30, 40 people, you know? Just wasn't for me.
I totally agree. It's, if you think about early stage, the skills you need to early stage don't always translate to mid or later stage, right? And there's definitely people that are epic at that kind of later stage story in those few hundred person, 1,000+ person companies. So 100%.
But you got to develop that skill set, right? If that's something you want to be good at, you could probably be good at it, but you got to change your personality a little bit to develop that skill set in some ways. You got to morph.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I've done all three where I've been small, mid, and late, and then I've obviously been on the now the kind of strategy side of the world. But
what do you like
what
the
I
best,
found in the late stage?
Yeah, which do you like?
Well, right now I like strategy because I like the freedom that it provides. Like I like that I can like put my kids to bed, and there's very few things that people will notify me of that need like a 5-second answer. Like you know what I mean? Like in operations, my fear is like I'm the guy holding stuff back. Like I don't ever want to be the guy holding back the success of the company, which is also why you'll find that generally like I roll through email really fast because I feel like it's my commitment to teams that I'm not the slow point. But even in MySpace, you're dealing with, like hundreds and thousands of emails a day. Like the volume is just overwhelming. Yeah. So that's the time commitment is overwhelming, which I loved because it felt like, oh my God, I'm using like every aspect of my business skills at the same time. It's like full athletic force. But then, as my kids grew, suddenly I was like, I want to be able to like put my kids to bed and I need a little bit more freedom in my schedule. And so suddenly I moved into the strategy side, which I love as well. But I do at times miss operations. I mean, operations is really fun. And the wins and losses in operations, you feel more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say at times I miss that. There's no question. I miss the camaraderie and the team and like building something together like that. I mean, I'm just like all by myself at this point, right? But as an angel investor, it's like you can help a little bit. Like you get involved at times when they call on you. But for the most part, you don't really do anything. You just write a check. And that makes them.
Yeah, you have very limited.
Yeah.
100%.
There's really not much involvement, which is good. You don't want to be too involved as your name. You go start something if you want to build something,
Yeah, that's true. 100%. Yeah.
I remember seeing Jonathan Abrams on the cover of one of the magazines. What was it? Inc. 500 or something like that. Or Inc. magazine. And I remember like young kid, I was like early 20s and I was like, that's going to be me someday, Ma. I remember showing her this magazine and my dad's like, why do you even care about that shit? Like, did you ever look up to people like that were in our industry when you were a little bit younger and you're like, oh man, I could be like that too? Or like, did they inspire you in any way? Was there any people that that you remember earlier in your career?
I think like, it's hard to avoid growing up and not thinking about like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and these incredible people. But also like, I feel like I never like focused on it very much. Like it all felt so far away from me. I mean, I grew up in a small town inside of Oregon, outside of Portland. Like I wasn't surrounded by millionaires and billionaires and like crazy stuff. It's like if I saw a Porsche once a month, it was like a magic moment for me. You know what I mean? Like, so I just never like thought this is incredible, like a Porsche, So like, I think I didn't think that way, and then when I got to LA, I think my head spun because I was just like, oh my God, like, what is this? You're coming across all these rich kids and celebrities and all this weird stuff. And then I was just kind of in the middle of growing stuff. And at that point, I also wasn't really aware of the public market. So I never felt like I had like, this is the exact path for me. I feel like I kind of step after step. I'm a little more thoughtful now about, respecting people that are really innovative, either on the operational side, the strategy side, the capital side, the investment side. So I like that more. But like growing up, I don't think there was a distinct figure. Like I very much respected my parents' ability to start and control their own destinies. I love that. There were some family friends that looked like they had good lives, and I thought that was really, really cool. But there wasn't like that guy, you know.
Right.
I never really
But
had
so I guess if we had to define, it would be your parents. They were probably your docents. They inspired you.
Probably, yeah. I think they were the ones that, yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
And they gave me the confidence to go and start stuff on my own,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And just push me out there in the world.
Did you, like you said, you mentioned some other people. Like, did you ever look at other people and say to yourself, well, someday I want to be independently financially wealthy so that I don't have to be worrying? Or did you think about that as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I did for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in the same sense as you, like I felt that capital somehow, you know, equated to freedom, which in many ways it does.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be free to do whatever I wanted and not be restricted by capital. And I think from the moment I started earning money, I was like, this feels great. Like, I want to do this more. Like, this is important to me, which arguably is somewhat short-sighted as an entrepreneur, because if you're chasing capital, you're probably not really chasing the big dream. You're chasing maybe short-term. So, but certainly I understood that.
But you know what? Once you get some, right, Mike, you can chase the bigger one, because you got to get your first nut, so to speak. And then after that, it's like, I can swing for the fences. I'm taking care of it.
That's right.
Yeah. Which
100%.
I love that in a founder that I can invest in, by the way, because it's like, this guy's not going to take the first hit. You know,
that's right.
He wants a big
you're
win.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's right. No, I mean, I have founders that, you know, we've been involved in, and the moment that they thought they could make $1 million, they would sell the company as fast as humanly possible.
You're like, don't do that,
I'm done. Like, this is incredible. And I'm like, no. Like, there's so much more in front of you, you know? Yeah. And I also remember like an early story where when we were running UserPlane, we had an offer from somebody to invest. And we were at the same time talking about selling the company to AOL. And he flew down and he was like, look, you know, you can sell the company to AOL, but don't you want to look in that parking lot? And he's overlooking the parking lot and see like 3 Bentleys for you guys. And I was like, fuck that. I can pay my mortgage off with this other deal, you know? And like, so like, even then, like we sold and we all made a lot of money, which was excellent. And I guess maybe we could have bought Bentleys or something, but he definitely had that moment of like, don't you want to be a billionaire? And I was like, honestly, like now I'm not really worried about that. Right. Like, so you're exactly right. That first capital infusion gave me what I needed to feel safe. And then I can go and swing for the fences on those next bets, right? Which is basically what we've done. Yeah,
it's like you need escape velocity is what I always say, right? Once you get to that point where your net worth is taken care of, your kids are taken care of, at that point you could really swing for the fences. And I don't know what that number is for everybody. It's different for everybody based on how your lifestyle is, you know? So
that's right. And who your family is and who you're supporting in your family.
How many kids you have, how many anticipated grandkids you might have if you're thinking that far down. You know, I think about all that kind of stuff. So
exactly.
Who is the we're in this industry, so we meet people who have later become billionaires. Like, how many of those do you have? If you had to count, like on your head, you had to guess. It's like, it's insane, right?
Oh yeah, it's terrifying and humbling and and especially like with the wave of, because we also have this later practice in SPACs, and you know, a lot of the targets are people I've known for like 10, 20 years, like yourself, you know, and
take some of these guys public.
Like, yeah, we're like, wow, we're going to make like a lot of wealth is going to be created through this movement of these companies going public. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, and the ones that have, it's like in many, if I was summarizing it, like many of them, it's not their first or second journey, right? It's probably their third.
Yep.
They went after mega sized industries.
Yeah.
You know,
by the way, that lends back to what we just said. Like, they probably had already, most of the ones that I'm thinking of, they made their money. Like guys like Chamath and Reed and Naval, like all these guys had made money already. So they're like, I don't need to sell. Right. I'm letting it ride, you know?
That's right.
That's how you create those big major wealth, right? You got to just be in it for the long term. You got to have something that's growing, obviously. Exactly right. But yeah, that's true.
And a bunch of them put their own money into it. Like, they believe. They're like, this is a great, I believe I'm going deep. But the thing is, they just don't go after small problems. You know, like as an entrepreneur, I think historically I went after many small problems where it's like, you could look at things you spend time on and be like, there's no way that'll be $1 billion business, right? But they're going after sectors where, like, just to even have a little bit of success, you're worth $1 billion plus. And so that's one general qualification I've seen on those that have been successful.
You know what's funny about that? Like, in the early to mid 2000s, I didn't think anything was going to be worth billions. And then I saw YouTube shoot up past our site, and then they sold for 1.6, and I was like, what? And then today there's like 500 startups that are private that are $1 billion. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the money printing and inflation and zero interest rates and all that kind of stuff. But irrespective, I mean, it's just fully priced in right now. But I did not see that coming. I don't know about you. 10, 15 years ago, there's no way.
Oh, I totally agree. But also, like, when you're seeing these valuations where, we're going to take 6 to 10 times 2022 revenue, and that's your valuation. It's like, well, you could have 50 million in revenue right now and you could be worth $2 billion. So it's unbelievable the way that those valuations hit, which is probably why the market's a little bit overvalued.
Yeah, there's no question.
But I totally agree. I wouldn't have expected it.
No. I don't think anybody would have. So tell me, what's your biggest failure in business?
That's a really weird question. I mean, certainly MySpace was a big public failure, but
was that a public failure? You inherited that, right? I don't know.
I inherited that. Like, it wasn't a mess made by my own creation, but it was a mess nonetheless.
Yeah.
I think overall, if I was like fully critiquing myself, I'd probably say in many cases I spent too much time on certain things that in the end probably wouldn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, it's all time management in many cases, right? And so you start, make a list of everything you're spending your time on and say, here's everything I spend my time on. Here are the things that are going to matter versus not matter. And start actually saying everything you're spending a lot of time on that doesn't matter, and you got to just get rid of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think many entrepreneurs, they push that same rock over the hill for too long because they have some belief that's just like grinding it out. The statement I'll make with some of my entrepreneurs is like, look, I can hand you a butter knife and tell you to cut marble, and you'll never do it. Like, you could spend all day cutting through that marble, and it'll never happen, right? Like, better to just switch the material and find, a slab of butter to cut through versus a slab of marble. And so I've even found that with companies where I'm like, God, why? Like, we had one company that I remember working with that for 3 years was doing the same thing, and for 3 years they got the same growth you'd expect. And finally, I was like, just try something new. And they tried something new, and within 6 months, they were like 5 times larger than the thing that they had built for 3 years, And it was like, look, you've been cutting marble the whole time, and you just need to take that weapon and like attack a different surface. And oh my God, great result, right? And it takes a lot of time, as an entrepreneur or investor, to see that like you can have these incredible moments where within 2 or 3 or 6 months, everything can be fully transformed. But if you do the same thing, you get the same result. And so if I was critiquing myself, I'm sure many times in my life I did the same thing and got the same result, versus taking big, bold steps, really looking for that next big jump.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank. He was like, take the dog out back behind the barn and just shoot it. Right? It's like, this isn't working. Try something else,
Yeah,
but I see that a lot. You're right. People are just doing something over and over repetitively. Maybe they're getting comfortable in a comfort zone of some sort, and they're afraid to change it because they don't want it to go to zero, and they think they have something. Yeah. But honestly, it's about winning big. It's not about little micro wins in life, That's
right.
But they're also the same people who haven't gotten that big win yet. That's probably the issue.
Yeah. You also find that like with seed rounds, sometimes entrepreneurs are like, well, I told my investors I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it until every dime is wasted from the bank account and we just shut it down. And I'm like, no, the investors gave you the money because they believe fundamentally in you.
Yes.
And they want you to be successful. And so if you switch missions, like, that's okay.
Yep.
Communicate to them, but they're backing you. Now, it's different if you're series A, B, C, and you're super deep in strategy. I get that, but you don't have to like, if you find it's not working, like pivot, try something else, try something else.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's all about iteration. Everything is an iteration. I always jokingly say that the wheel wasn't created. It wasn't an original idea. Somebody saw a coconut fall off a tree and roll, and they're like, oh, look at that idea. It's like everything's just seeing different ideas and just iterating on it, right?
Yep.
So if you're stuck in the one thing, you have to try to switch it up a little bit,
Totally agree.
Who's the most impressive entrepreneur that you've worked with?
I mean, I spent a lot of time with Evan Spiegel early days when he was getting Snap rolling, and like, he's pretty impressive. I mean, like, his understanding of translating emotion into product was like, and understanding why emotion was lacking in certain aspects of the broad product landscape, and then how he would bring it into Snap. I mean, the insight there was pretty incredible. Mike Dubin behind Dollar Shave Club was epic around his vision for men and those products and how he was going to do it. We have an entrepreneur now named Delane Parnell who works on Play Versus, who is revolutionizing esports through high schools, and he has a big vision around him that I get really excited about. There's a fellow named Benoit that we work with Mammoth Media, who's just like a hard-driven, data-grinding operator. A fellow named Steve is working with Prey. The team behind Liquid Death is epic. I mean, I think with all these people I'm able to spend time with, they all have different qualities that make them kind of special in their own right. I would say that one thing that's always a big signal for me is like when I meet with an entrepreneur and at the end of the meeting, if I realize I've given so much during that meeting and they've given me so little because they were so strategic on getting knowledge from me that would help them advantage their business, I feel pretty compelled to invest. Like I've had 2 or 3 meetings with entrepreneurs, I won't mention them, where at the end of the meeting, I did not know what they even did. I felt like they stole and robbed me of all my secrets, and they subsequently went off and built multi-billion-dollar companies because they were there to win. Like they weren't there to like impress me. They were there to steal every bit of strategy I had in my
I feel like
mind and
Zuckerberg.
apply
I've
it
never
towards the
met him,
problem.
but I feel like Zuckerberg is that guy, right? He's very
I
quiet,
suspect too.
cool and collective, right? But did you meet
Yeah,
him? I've never met
yeah.
him.
I've only met him in group settings. I've
Okay.
never had like one-on-one time with him, so I can't really
Just seeing
testify to
interviews and
that.
stuff, it's just like he just seems so
Yeah,
calculated, very calculated
yeah,
guy.
very curious.
Yeah.
Very curious individuals. So when I find very curious individuals, because the other thing it shows is that they don't have an ego. They're not there to
Yep.
prove to you they know
Yeah.
everything. They're there realizing you have something to teach them, and their goal is to get it from you in that meeting to make them stronger afterwards.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, totally. Like when I met Naval the first time, he was one of those kind of guys. I was like, oh my God, he was very
Yeah.
impressive to me. And I met him, God, in '06, and he wasn't like famous Naval as we know now, as you know.
Yeah.
He was like the coming off of E-Pinions, I think, or something, and I was like, I left and I was like,
Yeah.
who is this guy? This guy's so fucking smart and
Yeah.
calculated, right? And he's very
Yeah.
articulate too, so
Yeah.
he sounds smart.
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
What's
Yeah.
your, Mike?
Chamath's brilliant too. I mean, Chamath
Yes.
is like, I feel like I only understand half the things that he and I have talked about over the years.
I was going to say he's another one.
Very brilliant.
Reed, Naval,
Yeah.
and Chamath are probably the three most impressive guys that I met back in the day, and they've obviously gone to do amazing things. It's not surprising at all.
Yeah.
To other people are
Yeah.
like, who are these guys? I have like old Wall Street angel investors, and then they known that I had them in my deal back in the day. Well, Naval wasn't, but Chamath was at Mayfield, so he was inadvertently in a deal. We used to sit in product meetings and stuff, and he was a pretty smart guy, very smart. What is your superpower?
I think it's changed over time. Like right now, I think my superpower is actually helping others realize whatever their vision is and how to actually take it from a vision into reality. So I'm particularly good at like you said, like, look, I want to create this and get to here. I'm particularly good at understanding the steps that you need to do to take to get there. Right. And so, often like when people are like, what's my vision? Like my vision is, 1,000 hyper diverse through both gender, ethnicity, super successful billionaire entrepreneurs. Like that's my vision is like taking people and giving them all the knowledge and all the resources we have at our disposal to make them super successful and do, globally disruptive but businesses. And so right now that's my focus, which is like, how do I identify uniquely strong talent and surround them with all the resources they need to go off and be, hyper successful.
What is your kryptonite?
Probably my kryptonite is, I can emotionally fall in love with ideas that I probably should abandon. Whether it's people that just aren't going to get there, but I really believe I can get them there, or projects that like just aren't hitting that next wave. Like, so I can get emotionally attached to things that I have to be very cautious about, especially considering I'm the manager of other people's money, primarily in the venture fund realm. I think that's probably the right one.
Speaking of raising, I mean, you've raised a lot of money for this business, but when you first came out of the gates, how much capital did you guys start with at Science?
We started with 10 million from basically people that had known me throughout my career, and they were just really gracious. And then we subsequently raised another 30 million from, again, like someone who I had a deep relationship with, and they really kind of saw this vision that we were building at Science, and they were hyper supportive early days. And we've returned them a good amount of money, and I hope to return them a lot more money to thank them for that, early start.
You've done well financially. What continues to motivate you? Like everybody thinks that you're going to make all this money and you're going to want to go sit on a beach somewhere. And everybody I know that has ever made a lot of money doesn't do that. So can you describe to me why you don't do that?
It's funny. I remember after I sold my first or second company, someone's like, well, you're just done working, right? And, I get too bored, like if left to my own devices, I'd probably just like sit on a couch all day and
play
watch
video
TV.
games.
Like, I'll just deteriorate as a human. Like it was, so I like to be challenged. I like to work on new things. I like young energy. I like new ideas. When crypto came up, got super deep there. When SPACs came up, we got super deep there. Like I like new things and I like to learn and I like to understand the way things work. The only thing I've done that I think is, unique to being able to kind of create your own calendar is I previously did about a 2-hour commute every day, right? I lived in Malibu and I would work in Santa Monica. And then when the quarantine hit, I was like, I'm going to take those 2 hours. I'm just going to do something physical. So I got really into cycling. I got really into some sports, and that makes my days better. And granted, like maybe that's a privilege because I can set my own calendar. So that's something special I can do. Arguably, I think right now, a lot of people could find ways to do it. So I suspect I work the same amount of hours, if not more, because we never take vacations during COVID. But on a day-to-day basis, I feel a little bit more fulfilled because I'm outside and have more physical movement versus just like chained to the desk 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, which was my typical routine for the last 20 plus years.
What are you most proud of in your career?
I mean, it's funny. I was talking to my daughter last night about ethics. Like, I think I'm most proud of that. I don't feel that I've sacrificed my ethics on the businesses I've chose to spend time on or the entrepreneurs I chose to spend time on. Like, I avoid, in the late 90s, it was really easy to make a lot of money in adult content. I was able to avoid that because I just didn't feel like I could honestly go back and face my family if that was where we made our capital.
Can you imagine?
There's been other areas yeah, it's like, well,
Janet Jameson.
Exactly. Or early days of like the vaping explosion, right? Like I have a lot of friends that made a lot of money off vaping, right? Like, but like, I was just like, look, I don't think I can feel good about that if my goal is to convince children to take like cherry flavored tobacco, right?
Yep.
So, so it's funny because
I also passed on every cannabis opportunity. Not that I'm against cannabis personally, but I don't know what.
Yeah.
I just was like, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't know.
Yeah, and I did the same thing mainly because like I was more worried. Not that cannabis is right or wrong. I just really don't understand the long-term effects of society. And I was like, look, since I don't understand it, maybe I don't need to be part of that. And again, like if I'm trying to teach my kids not to actively use cannabis as kids, and yet we're making all of our money off cannabis, I was like, I don't know how I shore that up. Like, what is the dinner conversation when I'm like, Daddy did a good job at selling more weed today? So like I avoided those.
I'm a legal drug dealer.
Exactly. Which like I have a lot of friends and like
I don't judge anybody for it. I just didn't want to have the connotation.
All my friends smoke weed. Like, it's
well, I actually have a card, to be honest with you, because I have neuropathy, so I have a card. It helps me go to bed. But the point is, I don't. To your point, I just didn't want to have that discussion with the kids as they get older, and I was like, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah,
I literally passed on.
I just didn't want the discussion, and so I told my daughter last night, like, winning matters, but the way you win matters. Yeah. The way you win matters, right? And so right now, whatever areas that I've won and lost, I've won and lost based on my ethics and morals that stay true to myself, and I feel really good about that.
How many companies have you guys incubated, invested in, or bought at this point? Last I read was like over 50. Is it more?
Oh yeah, it's way over 50. Somewhere on my computer, I have like a chart I made, but I think it's around 120 now because it's probably about 12. I mean, it's probably 12 actual companies a year for almost 10 years. Wow. And then there's beyond that, like probably another 5 or 6 experiments that happened every year, right? And so
internal experiments, you're saying, right? You guys come up with ideas.
Yeah, like maybe we should start up this thing. Let's start this thing up. Oh, it's not going to be a business. Let's shut it down. So it never got like formalized as a company. It never had a full-time dedicated team. So yeah, we've played in a lot of sectors, and some of those experiments that we shut down like became really big businesses for other people, right? And so in certain cases, maybe when we were experimenting with it, we had the wrong people involved, or it was the wrong timing, or the market wasn't quite ready. And then suddenly later on, people found scale there. So, even in those cases, like we're never 100% right. My goal is I just need to be 20 to 30% right with the right ownership. And then I could be really right, even if I'm not 50% right, it's okay. Assuming we own enough of the companies that we are right on.
What are your top 2 best investments at Science that you've had so far?
So far,
obviously there's some that may be better in the future. We don't know, but the ones that have the biggest wins.
I mean, Dollar Shave Club was obviously a monster win. In the first 4 years, we sold Dollar Shave Club, FameBit, Hello Society, and a company called Playhaven. Yeah. And so they all packed together, made a really good first year 4, year 5 for us. Yeah. Right now, it's like,
and that was unusual to have such an early success so early in those investments, right? Because Dollar Shave Club is quick, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was like 4 years.
That's
really
amazing.
Fast.
It's usually like 7-8 years or something, I think, right?
Exactly. It was a quick return for everybody. Like right now, it's like Liquid Death is doing exceedingly well. This water brand that we've been investing in. Play Versus feels like a big win. Mammoth Media seems great. Pray.com, and then we've got a bunch of up and comers. Hello Me, Good Patch, Lambs.
Whatever happened to MeUndies? I think Peter asked me about that 1 years ago. And
MeUndies did great. Like. They actually just bought out a lot of their early investors at a really favorable return for us. I'm a huge believer in the company. What's funny is I think if it was just my personal capital, I wouldn't have actually sold. But because it was fund capital and we're kind of year 7, 8, 9 or whatever in our first fund, it made sense. But those guys have done great. We were very involved in the very beginning.
Speaking of selling,
and I love their management.
Howard Lindzen was telling me he put $1 million into Robinhood and it was worth like $100 million unrealized, and he sold like 20% of that. before the whole debacle that just recently happened, by the way. Great timing. He did it like 2 months beforehand. He was like, I got that one right. But I remember saying it to him at the time. It was like a month or so ago. And I was like, why are you selling that? And he's like, because we have to return capital to investors and we're raising another fund and the same investors will invest in the next fund. I mean, there's this dynamic that I think a lot of people don't understand, that sometimes the earlier stage investors will sell early, even though they don't. If it was, like you said, your own personal capital, you probably wouldn't have done that, but you're managing other people's money, right? So can you just kind of talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when you put together a fund, which is not a fast feat, right? Like a fund can take like half a year to 2 years to kind of assemble, and people really need to get to know you. They're obviously, from the moment they give you their money, they don't expect it back tomorrow, but they understand that the industry standard is 7 to 9 years, but they'd be really happy if you got it back to them much sooner, right? So, so you have to start looking at like, okay, well, like how much capital have we returned? How long in the tooth is this fund? Are these people like starting to, get a little antsy? Would it be better for, if a company's going public, is it better to distribute money before so that they can buy their own public shares? How are we going to be doing this? But you do have to manage that, and you report quarterly, right? And you report quarterly both off your marked up, IRR, and you also report off of the amount of capital you've distributed to them. And so, if you have a fund with all markups and no distributions, people are like, well, maybe I'll wait a little bit for your next fund, right? And so
show me some money first.
As funds, exactly, bring back my money first. There's certain investors that 100% are like, we're long forever, just keep compounding my money. Yeah. But most investors are like, look, I need to see that you can actually liquidate and bring me back some position, bring me back some returns before I go into fund 2, fund 3, fund 4, right? And so that always plays into that question of like, should we take that early sale or not?
Yeah, I've been dabbling in the secondary markets for a long time. I bought Facebook pre-IPO rather, stock, and a couple others. I've been doing that for a long time, and there were some people that had some strong opinions about that 10 years ago. I don't want to name names, but some people that we both know, and they were like, I don't believe in the secondaries. I was like, that doesn't make sense. I was like, it totally makes sense for some of these employees to take some money off the table. And I learned later, I think Dave McClure is running a fund now that does that. He buys off of funds because there's a need to give capital back to your LPs, right?
That's right. Yeah, both funds want to get out of their positions to show returns, and also to your point, you have a bunch of early stage employees that have all this paper value. Yes. There's also certain tax consequences that you can also hit that might require somebody to sell some position. The only kind of thing that I think everyone gets nervous about is when you have founders liquidating meaningful positions, and then you're starting to say to them like, gosh, how much money is in their bank account, and at some point are they demotivated for the success of the business because they've kind of had their win. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's one of those things that like if you have a company that's like doing secondary at 500 million or $1 billion value, like that's a pretty solid exit for a lot of those founders, even if the company fails. And so you have to be a little bit cautious around that, and boards definitely have very distinct opinions about it.
Let me ask. I'm on Clubhouse now, and I've been using it a lot. I got to tell you, it's the most addictive social media product that I've ever seen, Mike. It's crazy. Yeah. I looked at my usage on it, the time spent on my phone, and it's like 8 hours a day on average. I'm lying. It's actually more. It's sad. But I'm on there. I'm moderating the rooms and stuff. We talk about Bitcoin, which we'll talk about in a minute. And what do you think of Clubhouse, this whole drop-in audio explosion? I think you're going to see a ton of different verticals within it. Are you guys messing around with anything, looking at companies like that? Like, what do you think of the drop-in audio movement?
So I like the fact that it's a social platform that provides meaningful content, right? Like every time I jump in, I feel like I can learn something, and that's exciting. It reminds me a little bit like if podcasts are like recorded audiobooks, Clubhouse to me feels like radio. Like it's radio, that's right? Like it's talk radio.
We're going backwards.
Like this is right, but I mean, like it is radio. The difference is you can be the DJ, right? People can participate, but it is what that was, right? Sometimes I jump into a room and they're doing 10 minutes of introductions and sponsorship and and I'm just like, oh my God. And I feel the same way I feel with radio. I'm like, can this talk show host just start getting into the interview? I want to jump into this crap. Like why? And other times I jump in and I hit that nice content, right? So to me, it's just to your point. It's iteration. Yep. Somebody looked at radio, they iterated. Yeah. I think it's meaningful content, and I think right now when I look at like my Facebook experience or my Instagram experience, I don't find a ton of meaning right now. Like every once in a while I get a cool picture, and maybe there's an article on Facebook, but I don't feel it's meaning. I get some meaning out of Twitter, but I get it with so much noise. It's like there's so much just like, oh my God, and I don't like this or I like this, and something I don't know. And then Clubhouse feels a lot more intentional to me. Yeah, it's signal. And obviously, like the thing I often ask myself is like, if they had launched this outside the pandemic, would it have been what it is?
I don't think so. Like, that phenomenon, it's like, and I think it will stick past post pandemic. I think it's going to stick.
I think it will too.
Yeah. I believe, I don't know about you, but I think this is the next $100 billion business, unless they sell it early. I don't think they will because of these valuations we're seeing so early. It seems like they're swinging for the fences here. What do you think?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I think they'll go for it. I mean, for sure. Like, and they have the ability to go for it. And if it becomes more and more meaningful content and they can expand, it's great. I also think that like for seniors, even though I know seniors aren't their core audience, like I think this is a really compelling platform because seniors jumping into like random video Zoom rooms, like they're not going to do that. But my dad is very familiar with talk radio. He loves talk radio. It's AM stations all the way, right? And so suddenly, if he can open up Clubhouse and jump into a senior talk room and then participate, oh my God. And like how incredible for people that feel lonely or isolated or in a retirement home and can't get out, like this becomes a really compelling platform. So that human connection with it, I think feels really special.
I'd like to have you come in our rooms. We have 2 clubs on, we talk about Bitcoin. I have Digital Gold, that's one of my clubs, and Master Bitcoin Today. I'd love you to come on. You just got to follow me and I'll edge into the schedule at some point.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Love to.
Yeah, we'll do it later. And what's great is we don't do all that crap. It's like, Mike, what's your background? It's so annoying.
Yeah.
Like we literally don't do that on purpose because we say the same thing. We're like, why do they do this crap? You know, some of them like they have sponsors that they're mentioning. Like, I'm not making money off of this. I don't need to do that. So I just go on and we just have conversations about stuff. That's it.
Yeah, that's better. It's a better way to do it. Totally agree.
It's very natural and organic. Listen, let's talk Bitcoin. I want to talk about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Cool.
What do you want to talk about?
So when did you first learn about Bitcoin? Because for me, the first time I learned about it was from Fred Wilson off of his blog, actually. This magic internet money he's talking about. What about you? What was your first, do you remember the first time you read about it or heard?
I remember the first time I purchased, because I purchased through Mt. Gox.
Wow.
And like, I remember buying it and like, I don't even know what I bought at this point, and I don't think I ever got access to it ever again.
It's gone.
And I don't really want to know at this point. It's just like, you know what, whatever was there.
There's $1 billion out there somewhere.
Who knows?
Fell off a boat.
Who knows? So like, I remember seeing it, and then, you know, because I was in LA, I came across Brock Pierce a lot, right? And Brock was an old friend and super nice to me, and he would come in and just being like, 1,000 miles a minute, this is everything that's happening, you got to get involved, right? And and so the more he talked to me, the more I'm like, okay, we have to find ways to get involved. But to my original point on like what I felt proud of, there was stuff that it was like, oh, this is really unethical. I don't think I can get involved to the market this way, but this stuff maybe makes sense to me. And I started finding where my comfort zone is, with the whole crypto industry. And then obviously we formalized the whole practice around it and been involved ever since.
So did you ever buy it again after the Mt. Gox debacle? Like, did you?
Oh, yeah, no. I've been in and out of Bitcoin thousands of times.
You've traded it, basically. Okay.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've done every flavor of it. Like we've set up private funds. I have individual traders that work for me. We ran our own hedge fund for a while. I've tried to day trade myself. Yeah. You know, now
how did that go? Trading it? I feel like you can't mess that up if you just hold on when it drops. It always comes back.
Yeah. I managed to mess that up pretty well, but I mean, I came out ahead, which is great, but I realized like I was a really shitty day trader. And the reason why is because I was just accumulating and trading through all the swells as it reached like 18,000 on that first wave, whatever that was 3 or 4 years ago.
13 or 14.
I had beautiful stop losses set up. When it dumped, I got out and I made a ton of money. And I was like, I'm a genius. This is incredible, right? Like best trader ever. And then it was so dormant for so long. Yep. Then when it came back, I'm like, time to come back in. I kept coming back in. But then every time it started dropping, all I could remember was when it did that $18,000 drop. Yeah. You know what I mean? When it hit the peak and just tanked.
To like 3.
And I'd be like, oh, dude, I got to get out. It's going to do it again. Because like once you've seen something go from like 18,000 down to whatever the bottom was, like 3,000 or something, you're like, I couldn't forget, even though
like an 80% plus drop. I mean, it's crazy.
I remembered it, right? And I remembered going, like, I was like my kid's soccer coach. And I remember like coaching these kids, and this super nice mom came up to me and she's like, okay, I got my whole 401k, into Bitcoin, and I need an account on Binance. Can you get me somebody that can like get me and I'm just like, oh, this feels like, I'm not sure, and then somebody did an 80% drop, and I got out, but I don't know what happened to her money. You know what I mean? Like, so I have this, I had this bad memory. And so then with all the swells, I would write it up, but I would immediately jump out because I was like, oh, it's going to turn again. And I realized I'm just not good at that. I need to have long-term conviction. So I changed my strategy to like long hold on a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. a bunch of allocation to a quant fund that we designed, which I'm so excited about, that we're partnered with this incredible AI team on that I just love. And then a few traders that I really trust that have like micro funds set up around them. And the best thing for me to do is put in money and just stop.
Tell me about the quant team. Tell me more about that. Like, what's going on there?
Well,
because I would imagine like the Renaissance guys, like Jim Simons and stuff. They got to be messing around with Bitcoin. There's so much volatility.
They are. Oh no. They've been messing around. I mean, the guys that are smart at this have been messing around for a long time in this. This is not new.
It's boosting the returns. Yeah.
Yeah. We finally set up a platform through one of our investments. That's basically a copy trading platform where you can like identify people that with certain behaviors, and then you can set up and enable copy trading. And for me, it's been the actual right answer to the question, because it gives me broad-based token exposure. I don't feel like I miss out on moments. If there's a big market correction, it safeguards me against that without me having to manage. The fees for me are reasonable. And so for me, it ended up being a good solution. And there's so much data and so much movement. Like there's you just can't stay on top of it. Like the quants are going to win at this at the end of the day. Yeah. And the beautiful part of this is like, it's all built in such a way that like systems like these can plug in to crypto, to the entire blockchain regardless, or the exchanges really effectively. And so, it feels like a really neat thing to do. I mean, it's amazing to me. I don't do more of it within the public markets, but I kind of feel like
what kind of returns you look at annually with them? Like, what do their returns look like?
I mean, I look at weekly returns on them, and I basically compare it against Bitcoin, Bitcoin appreciation, and it's always double digits above Bitcoin appreciation.
Wow.
So if I'm thinking about holding Bitcoin, it's better for me to put it into the engine, and then I'll always typically outperform Bitcoin. And then if there is a massive drop, I won't sustain those losses. So
you will never
I found it
draw
to
down.
be much more effective.
Yeah, you will never.
Well, unless there's like there could be other errors, right? There could be technical errors. There could be issues with the AI. But overall, for me, it's been a good strategy. We're just starting to open it up. So like,
do you have a HODL position for just a portion of capital? Just sits, or you just?
I do.
Okay, yeah.
No, I do. So I split it among long hold, quant, and then some individual traders I trust. And then I have equity exposure to a handful of, picks and shovels oriented businesses. And
what kind of investments do you have into the picks and shovels businesses? The Bitcoin only businesses, right?
Well, not necessarily Bitcoin only. I guess like
they're crypto. Okay.
Science has a really interesting investment with a company called Protego that it's basically a very unique bank charter that'll be one of the future kind of big banks in crypto. If you research Protego and the most recent grant that they've had, I think it's going to be really, really exciting. It arguably could probably be one of the biggest company sciences that's touched. Very complicated, very regulatory based. Been something we've been working on for years. Taken a long time to get here, but something that I think could have a ton of value. So I put a lot of weight in there. And then our Science Blockchain Fund also has an investment in a company called Real Blocks that does kind of like real estate, like REIT liquidity using blockchain technology. It's really, really cool. Super excited about those guys. Then we have a handful of others that we're pretty cool.
So there's like 8,000 plus coins that are out there. Bitcoin's clearly the number one coin. Do you think it will always remain the number one coin?
It's a really good question. I mean, like from a what's the equivalent of digital gold, Bitcoin, I think 100% is the answer to that.
Yeah.
The only thing that gives me pause on it is when I think about like the growth of NFTs, and I've not gotten into collecting NFTs because I generally don't like to collect physical things, and I'm not excited about collecting digital things. Like I'm not a collector, but
you don't have any Pokemon
the concept
cards?
Of like, oh my God, I think I do have some Pokemon cards. But that was because I played Pokemon with my kids. Yeah, but I'm not a collector, right? Like, anyway, but so what I do think about is like, at some point when like, it's like I think I have a safe, right? Inside the safe, there's a bunch of papers, and those papers represent ownership, title to a car, insurance policy for a diamond ring or something,
exactly.
And I think to myself, like, those should all be NFTs. Like when I go get an insurance policy and they give an appraisal for some jewelry my wife probably lost, but maybe still has, then like I should have an NFT on that, not a piece of paper, and that should just be
it should be in the blockchain, so we don't have to worry about losing it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or like my kid's birth certificate. Like that's great. It's in a safe. I'd much rather a digital NFT that verifies this piece of content that sits inside my digital safe. So
love it.
The reason why that comes to mind is if I imagine a world where physical and digital ownership is mapped to NFTs, everything, house, title, car, computer, monitor, art, everything's tied to NFTs. Okay. And if that was all built on ETH, That's a lot of ETH.
Yeah.
That's a lot of gas. That's a lot of transactions, right? And from that view, if the whole world mapped their ownership on ETH, I would imagine the market cap of ETH would go high, except for the fact that if the gas cost gets too high, you can't do it, because then suddenly creating the piece of paper costs $50, which you're not going to want to do.
That's right.
Right? So from digital gold, yes.
How do they solve
Bitcoin?
That? Is there a solution to that?
Well, aren't they talking about like the proof of stake versus the proof of work, and maybe that impacts gas? There has to be a modification there.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really neat idea, and it makes sense to me. Like, I get the logic behind that. So when someone, we've actually been looking for a company, or maybe we'll start one if we can't find one, that just maps real world ownership to digital NFTs. That's all I want. Like, all the shit in my house, just map it, right? So I can prove that I own this stuff, and then I can borrow against it. I can issue debt against it. I can, transfer it. I can insure it, right? Like, so I'm excited about that around the NFT world, which is it's a very real use of ETH for me.
Speaking of debt, like what Michael Saylor has been doing is unbelievable. It took all his cash, buys Bitcoin, goes out and raises debt at a 0% interest rate for $1 billion and buys more Bitcoin because we can give the bondholders exposure to Bitcoin because they can't buy Bitcoin. I mean, what is happening in this world right now? Are you guys putting any of your cash on the balance sheet converted into Bitcoin at Science? Have you done that?
Our Science blockchain vehicle holds Bitcoin as a component to its cash holdings. Our Science venture fund doesn't, mainly because the venture fund's pulling down capital as we use it.
It's too volatile.
Even when you hear somebody, oh my God, they have a X number venture fund, it's not like all that money's typically sitting in the bank account, right? We call down capital from our investors on a quarterly basis. And so we're very rarely sitting on like a lot of cash. So we're not typically holding it in any kind of, coin.
That makes sense. Personally, do you mind telling me what percentage of your net worth is in crypto or Bitcoin?
That's a good question. Out of my like liquid net worth, it's probably like, like maybe 10%.
Okay.
Probably between 5 and 10%, depending on how you define.
Would you rebalance that, or would you just let it go? Like, it could end up becoming 99% over time, and that would be fine with you.
I think as I have conviction, if I continue to have deep conviction in the quant trading piece of this, I will probably increase my net worth into crypto.
Okay.
I just need some mental safeguards around an 80% drop. Like, since you and I have seen it, like I can't not remember that because I remember it brings fear to me. And so, which is horrible. Like, if I was just entering the market now,
it's probably the worst thing that could have happened to you to experience that, because you're going to leave a lot of money on the table, right?
That's you're 100% right. Yeah. Like, so I have to let go of that. And so I'll be, because if you lined up IRR performance for me across all the different asset classes that I personally manage, I'm sure crypto beats everything by like a mile. So
I think it's averaged 200% CAGR. It's unbelievable for the last 10 years.
It's crazy. So
I don't think that's happening moving forward, but
yes. So I'm trying to. I will most likely be increasing my exposure to crypto.
What's your 5-year and your 10-year price prediction on Bitcoin?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, God, that's
because we don't know year to year, month to month, but 10 years. 10-year prediction.
I mean, listen. I remember when Bitcoin was escalating and like it hit 15,000 or 16,000. I remember thinking to myself, the moment it hits 16,000, it's worth 16,000. People will fundamentally believe it's worth 16,000. And whenever it's not worth 16,000, it's under what we perceive its value at. So that can't go on forever. But like it's hard to imagine it doesn't hit 100,000. Right. Yeah. I think it will hit that. I mean, at that point, could it hit 500,000? Like, it's possible. Yeah. I don't know the time frame. I don't know the emotional roller coaster of it getting there and what it means to have those big swells. But like, it hit 61,000 the other day. So I guess if Bitcoin's worth 61,000 right now, right.
There's a pretty small float on Bitcoin relative to the number of coins. It's really small.
That's right.
I think I saw a Bank of America article that's just a report that came out. It says that every 93 million, just say 100, every $100 million moves the price of Bitcoin by 1%. It goes up 1% for every 100 million inflows into it.
Oh,
and that's incredible. Actually.
I mean, if you think about it, as a kid growing up in Oregon, I never realized this, but like, there's a really big world of money. Really big world of money with people with
trillions,
numbers you can't count of capital, right? And if that theory of like, well, everybody should have 2% of their money in Bitcoin, God forbid that actually happens. I mean, like, I don't even know what the price would look like. Oh my God. Like, the numbers would go bananas. So, I mean, I think as you see it formalized and institutionalized, I just can't imagine it.
Well, speaking of institutionalized, Anthony Scaramucci was my first guest on this podcast, and he has a $200 million fund, which is worth $600 million now. So it's gone up that much in like 6 months.
Yes.
What do you think of Wall Street? Like what they're doing? I mean, including like what Square's done, what Tesla's done, what MicroStrategy's done, what they're all doing. They're putting this on the balance sheet. Do you see that wave continuing? Like if it does, and look at Ross Stevens just said that he has $21 billion in a book this year to bring clients onto Bitcoin, put it onto their balance sheet. It's incredible.
Yeah. What's funny, what I don't really know is like, if you're any one of those companies and you're sitting on a few $1 billion of liquid cash, I've never spent a lot of time thinking about treasury management.
Right.
So how do you manage treasury, right? So I don't know if previously, if you and I, ran something like company with $1 billion, we go to our CFO and we're not burning any money, and we're going to the CFO and we're like, please CFO, put like 5% into gold, buy some bonds.
Yeah.
No, we don't want it to go down, but like, where are we sitting, right? So I don't know if you assume that Bitcoin now is a slot inside of treasury management, or whether this is really a new behavior. Because what you didn't do previously, I assume, is go and buy like Apple stock, right? Because you'd be like, oh, it's a public equity, it's too volatile, right?
Yep.
So it feels funny to say that treasury now is holding volatile assets.
The most volatile asset there is.
The most volatile asset, right? Because if that was a good idea, we would have all done it a long time ago. Like, you would have bought stock in Salesforce or Apple or Amazon, or you would have bought other stocks that had high potential for appreciation. And so the question for me broadly is, okay, if you had 1,000 companies that had over $1 billion in treasury, what percentage of them have any capital in a volatile asset class? I would love to know that question. And if it was like 80% of them, then I'd be like, totally logical, they're Bitcoin.
Yeah.
If they were like 10% and 90% has no volatility, I'd be like, it's insane then to put your money into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right? Because volatility isn't new. We've always had volatility, and there's probably some guy there or girl there that was like, oh, I love gold, let's put it into gold. It's like, oh, the price is too volatile, we shouldn't do that. So it doesn't make sense to me beyond like, we're doing it because there's a movement and we want to be part of that movement. But they could also be putting their money into venture. They could be putting money into Black founded businesses, female-led entrepreneurship. Like there's other places you can vote with your capital if you just want to put money into volatile areas that you're voting with versus just cryptography and Bitcoin. So I don't quite understand the logic yet of it, even though it might be a great investment.
I think it's the growth historically. I believe, I don't know either, to your point, but when I try to wrap my head around it, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe they just put a small amount in, and if it continues to do what it's done in the past, the old saying is, prior performance does not dictate future performance, but that's not how people invest. They look at the backwards, right? But you take 1%, 2%, 5%, whatever you put it in there, if you're getting this 200% CAGR for the next few years, it's going to be worth more than the entire amount of capital that you have, right? So.
But we can make that same argument for another stock. Like we could pick a public stock that's had that same level of growth and be like, you should just do that. Why do you just put money in the NASDAQ then? And maybe they do. So like, for me, it's a question of volatility. It's not a question of Bitcoin.
It's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
The policy around volatility.
So you met your friends with Chamath, right? He's been pounding a drum on this and calling it schmuck insurance for a long time. Who do you think is the most influential person in Bitcoin today? Not ever, like I wouldn't say the people that were the early OGs, but like right now in this moment and what's moving the markets. There's quite a few people, but if you had to name a couple, who do you think they are?
I mean, I really like Barry Silbert over at Grayscale Trust. I mean, Grayscale products are unbelievable. They're like one of the largest asset managers in the world right now. I mean,
incredible. He's
been very quiet, in my opinion, massively accumulating Bitcoin, managing all this stuff. Like
they own like 3% of all Bitcoin, I think.
Oh yeah, I think I read today they have 45 billion of assets underneath.
It's unbelievable.
It is a big number. Like by the way, a tech guy, who had startups and then decided to enter into Wall Street and become one of the largest asset managers.
Second market.
New York. I mean, what the hell? Like, go Barry, and like he's out there tweeting all day.
He's beating the shit out of Wall Street. I love it. It's a tech
he's just
guy.
nice and just doing his job.
He's chill, man. He's not a public face kind of guy. Yeah.
Yes.
I never see him on TV or anything,
Totally agree.
Yeah, he's
and
cool.
he just believes, he just released a bunch of new trusts I think they call them trusts, but new products under the Grayscale banner with certain tokens. I mean, it's very
And I think
cool.
he's applied
I
for
really
an
like what
ETF. He's going to create an ETF too. I probably convert the
Yeah.
trust into an ETF. He's going to have to, because I don't know if you track it at all, but they used to pay a premium to get into to the grayscale trust. GBTC,
Right.
I think it is GBTC, right? And now it's actually selling at a discount, which is really weird. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think that's
weird.
because there's outflows. If you have too much outflows too quickly, it probably does
Sure.
that. I don't know how that'll perform over the longer term, but it'll probably just convert to an
Yeah.
ETF. But him,
Yeah.
I would say, and Michael Saylor and Chamath, I would say, are probably the most vocal
Yeah.
and gotten it under the radar.
Totally agree.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, any more of your time, I should say. This was fun, man. I really
No, this is
appreciate
great.
it.
Yeah.
This is
I love
awesome.
reconnecting. I'll do it anytime you want. I
Yeah,
appreciate the conversation.
Cool, Mike. All right.
Yeah.
Mike Jones, everybody. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thanks for having me. Take care.